Ritual killings for power? BBC uncovers dark body parts trade in Sierra Leone. Good evening, Africa. I'm Ahisatu Kamara Kargbo, and this is the BAV Inside Salone show, where we speak truth to power and bring to light the stories buried beneath silence and shadows. Tonight, I bring you a chilling expose, a story that rips open the veil covering one of Sierra Leone's darkest undercurrents, ritual killings and the clandestine market for human body parts. This isn't folklore, it's not whispered legend, it's reality, one unearthed by the brave investigative work of BBC Africa Eye, whose latest report has shocked a nation into a reckoning with its beliefs, its justice system, and its soul. Warning, this story contains distressing details. The investigation, blood money and broken families. The story begins with tragedy, the gruesome 2020 murder of 11-year-old Papayo Kalokoh in Makini. His mutilated body, eyes gouged out, organs and an arm removed, was discovered in a well. 4 years later, there is still no justice, just silence. They killed my child, and now there is just silence, said his mother, Sierra Kalokoh, in an interview that haunts the conscience of the nation. Source, BBC Africa Eye, 2025. And this is not an isolated case. What the BBC uncovered is a hidden network of so-called juju practitioners who openly offer human body parts for sale, claiming they are key ingredients in spiritual rituals that grant power, wealth, or protection. Operating in the shadows but serving clients in broad daylight, including, as alleged, the political elite, this underground economy trades in terror. Posing as a politician seeking influence, the BBC's undercover journalist contacted two men. The first, a masked operator known as Kanu, welcomed the reporter into his shrine in Kambia district, claiming he worked with big men across West Africa. He showed what he said was a human skull and quoted 70 million leones, approx $3,000 USD for female body parts. The second, Idara, based in a suburb of Freetown, boasted of leading a network of 250 herbalists. He chillingly said, "There are no human parts that we don't work with." The evidence led to a police raid on Idara's compound, supported by Sheikhu Tarawali, president of the Council of Traditional Healers. Idara and two associates were arrested, charged with practicing sorcery and possessing weapons used in ritual killings, yet they pleaded not guilty and were granted bail.
He advises if you one on the back, you full one, you can get her.
This is Idara from Sierra Leone, who claims to sell body parts. Idara meets our undercover reporter, whose cover story is that he needs body parts for use in rituals to ensure political success.
I don't think they do. We're not getting nothing what they say. But
ritual murders are not recorded as distinct offense here. Their true scale is unknown. Our undercover reporter leaves Idara, instructing him not to do anything. Idara later calls, claiming his people are ready to act.
So since we messed that way, you call me. Because if you wait for we don't work this process here within this.
This is crazy. Someone's life could be in danger here. Idara could just be a scammer, but we immediately called the police. They later decide to raid the house.
What's in the inside?
The Council of Traditional Healers works with police to investigate ritual killings to root out rogue herbalists.
This removed from human. Stuff it with the cat head. This comes from human. He stuff it with dog head.
What's in this?
Now human here.
After finding and raiding Idara's shrine, the police feel they have seen enough inside it and detain him. Idara and two other men are charged under anti-witchcraft laws. They've since been bailed pending investigations.
Critical analysis, a nation under spell or strain. Let's call it what it is. This is a national emergency. But beyond the horror lies a deeply uncomfortable truth. The state is not equipped to fight this war. One pathologist, yes, one, serves a population of 8.9 million. Police forces are chronically underfunded and undertrained to investigate such crimes, especially those linked to witchcraft, sorcery, and political power. Many officers admit, off the record, that fear of occult retaliation stops them from probing too deep. Meanwhile, the judiciary stalls. Even high-profile cases, like the murder of a university lecturer found buried in a herbalist's shrine, remain unresolved years later. Justice delayed in these cases is not just denied, it's dismembered. And then it got personal. BBC journalist Tyson Conte, who led the investigation, was devastated when his own 28-year-old cousin, Fatmata Conte, was murdered in McKinney during the probe. Her teeth were removed, triggering widespread belief it was a ritual killing. No one has been arrested. Let that sink in. When even reporters uncovering the truth become victims, we must ask, who is safe? Africa-wide comparison, a continent struggling with occult crime. Let's widen the lens. Sierra Leone is not alone in this nightmare. From Uganda to Nigeria, Ghana to South Africa, the link between ritual killings and political ambition or economic desperation is an old evil wearing new clothes. In Nigeria, the use of human body parts for money rituals has triggered multiple arrests and sparked public outrage. In Ghana, police have struggled to shut down spiritual camps, where abuse and death have occurred. In Tanzania, albino people have been murdered for use in witch doctor ceremonies, promising prosperity. Yet the difference lies in state response. Some nations have taken proactive steps, launching special police units, funding forensic teams, and investing in public awareness campaigns. Sierra Leone, by contrast, remains reactive, overwhelmed, and often silent. Forward-looking, what must be done? This is where we must shift from outrage to action. The BBC's report is a wake-up call, but will the nation rise? 3 urgent priorities emerge. 1. Institutional reform and investment. Appoint and train additional forensic pathologists. Equip police to investigate occult-linked crimes without fear or superstition. Establish a dedicated task force on ritual killings. 2. Legal and judicial accountability. Review and strengthen laws on ritual killings, trafficking in human parts, and occult crimes. Create fast-track courts for occult-related crimes to prevent delays and witness intimidation. 3. Cultural re-education and awareness. Launch nationwide education campaigns in schools, churches, mosques, and marketplaces, challenging the belief that human sacrifice brings power. Empower local leaders, youth groups, and traditional chiefs to condemn these practices. If the body of an 11-year-old can be mutilated and discarded in a well, if grieving families can be silenced by fear, if justice remains a mirage, then what hope do the living have? This is not just about juju, it's about power, poverty, belief, and broken systems. The question now is whether Sierra Leone and Africa at large will choose to confront this horror or continue dancing with shadows. The culture of silence, when communities protect killers. It's often said that the dead tell no tales, but in Sierra Leone, even the living are afraid to speak. From Cambia to McKinney and the outskirts of Freetown, BBC investigators encountered a wall of fear. Witnesses afraid to talk, families intimidated into silence, community leaders choosing traditional resolutions over criminal prosecutions. The chilling truth is that ritual killings are not just committed by hidden cults in the bush, they are enabled by silence, facilitated by poverty, and in some cases, protected by power. When victims' families cry out for justice, the echo they hear is a blend of cultural fear and institutional paralysis. In Papayo Kalokoh's case, locals suspected powerful men were behind the killing. No one dared name names. In Fatmata Conte's case, the BBC reporter's own cousin, neighbors saw signs of ritualistic mutilation. But again, fear won. There were no arrests. Institutional impunity, the state's failure to protect. This is not just a story of beliefs gone wrong. It is a case study in institutional collapse. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Sierra Leone Police, the Judiciary, and even the Ministry of Health all carry a measure of responsibility for the system-wide neglect. Let's start with investigative capacity. Sierra Leone has one trained forensic pathologist. One. In a country with thousands of unresolved deaths, that is nothing short of criminal neglect. The police, underfunded and often untrained in forensic or occult-linked crime, frequently abandon cases once ritual elements are suspected. Some officers admit they don't pursue leads out of fear that the shrine will strike them. Then there is the judicial system. Delays, lost files, witness disappearances, and suspects released on bail, even in high-profile ritual killing cases, send a dangerous signal. If you kill for ritual, you may never face justice. What message does that send to the next would-be killer or the child whose life might be next? A nation trapped between belief and modernity. Ritual practices in Africa, be they for healing, protection, or prosperity, are not new. But there's a stark difference between traditional herbal medicine and ritual murder. The problem isn't spirituality. It's when spirituality is monetized, weaponized, and used to justify violence. BBC's interview with Idara, who claims to lead a network of 250 herbalists, should set off national alarms. If even a fraction of these practitioners are trafficking in body parts or performing rituals with human remains, Sierra Leone is in a crisis of national security. And yet, governments often hesitate to regulate or even challenge traditional practices, fearing backlash from religious leaders, chiefs, or political elites who depend on their support. But how long can a state dance between modern constitutional governance and pre-colonial ritual justice systems without falling into the fire? African examples. Where is hope taking root? Let's look beyond our borders. Rwanda, a country with a painful past, has invested in grassroots education and spiritual reorientation to combat harmful traditional practices. The government collaborates with churches, mosques, and traditional healers to ensure beliefs do not cross into criminality. Kenya, after a spate of child murders linked to ritual killings, launched a nationwide crackdown with dedicated police units and forensic teams trained to deal with occult crimes. In Benin, a country where Vodun is officially recognized, the government has worked with traditional priests to register and monitor shrines, separating legitimate cultural practices from criminal elements. These examples show it can be done, but it takes political will, cultural honesty, and courageous leadership. The education gap, where belief breeds in ignorance. Let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Illiteracy and poverty fuel the belief in supernatural shortcuts to wealth and power. When education is weak, when employment is scarce, when healthcare is inadequate, the promise of a charm that can bring riches overnight becomes irresistible to some. This is why ritual killings are not just a crime issue, they are a development issue. A country where education systems are under-resourced and young people are without hope will always be vulnerable to the false promises of juju wealth. What is needed is a national curriculum overhaul that includes critical thinking and scientific literacy, human rights education, and civic responsibility training from primary school through university. The role of international partners. Will the world continue to look away? Despite the horrific details in the BBC investigation, the response from international actors has, so far, been tepid. Where is UNICEF when children like Papayo Kalokoh are mutilated and dumped in wells? Where is UN Women when body parts of young girls and women are trafficked in rituals masquerading as tradition? And what of human rights monitors from the United Nations, African Commission on Human and People's Rights, or Amnesty International? Silence is complicity. Sierra Leone is a signatory to the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. It is bound by international conventions that criminalize ritualistic violence, child sacrifice, and human trafficking. And yet, year after year, ritual killings continue, with little more than rhetorical condemnation from abroad. It is time for targeted international pressure, not just hand-wringing. The European Union, World Bank, and United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, must tie funding for governance reforms to measurable justice outcomes in cases of ritual killings. International embassies, including those of Canada, the US, and the UK, must publicly press for accountability in high-profile cases. Interpol should assist in dismantling regional networks trafficking in body parts from Sierra Leone, Guinea, Liberia, and beyond. The diaspora's duty, from remittance to resistance. Let's be blunt, Sierra Leone's diaspora is powerful. They send hundreds of millions of dollars in remittances each year. They occupy influential roles in international institutions, media, academia, and tech. But when it comes to challenging the silence around ritual killings, diaspora engagement remains sporadic, emotional, and short-lived. We need a strategic, sustained diaspora movement focused on funding community awareness campaigns in towns and villages plagued by these crimes, lobbying international agencies and donor governments to demand justice for victims, supporting grassroots justice networks, lawyers, journalists, civil society watchdogs who are risking their lives to expose these crimes. Diaspora leaders can also push for the creation of an independent Sierra Leonean commission on ritual killings, modeled after truth and reconciliation frameworks, but focused on identifying patterns, victims, and perpetrators. Because if those abroad cannot use their freedom to speak for those silenced at home, then what is the value of their voice? Civil society. Where are the protests? We must also turn a critical eye towards civil society organizations within Sierra Leone. In recent years, we have seen massive mobilizations for elections, for fuel price hikes, and for gender-based violence. But where is the outrage when children are murdered for body parts? Why are there no nationwide marches for Papayo and Fatmata? Why aren't school associations, women's groups, and religious leaders staging vigils outside Parliament, demanding new laws and enforcement? Where is the Bar Association, the Medical and Dental Council, the National Council for Civic Education? This is not just a failure of law, it's a failure of national empathy. We need a citizens' movement that forces the government to act. One that says, our shrines cannot be stained with blood. Our culture must not be complicit in murder. The media's mission, beyond exposure, toward sustained coverage. The BBC Africa Eye investigation has done what local and regional media have hesitated to do: name the crisis, expose the network, and demand attention. But now it is our job, Sierra Leonean journalists and African broadcasters, to keep the story alive. Too often, our media houses cover a ritual killing today and forget it tomorrow. That cycle must end. We need dedicated investigative desks on organized occult crime, regular updates on open cases, especially when trials stall or suspects are mysteriously released. Collaboration across borders. Liberian, Guinean, Nigerian, and Ghanaian reporters working with their Sierra Leonean peers to expose transnational juju networks. At the Bold African Voice, we make a commitment tonight. We will continue to follow every case highlighted in this BBC report. We will name the victims, track the suspects, and challenge the officials until justice is not an exception, but the rule. The spiritual front. Reclaiming belief from blood. Not every traditional healer is a killer. Not every shrine is a slaughterhouse. But until the spiritual community rises up to denounce the trafficking of human parts, its silence will be seen as complicity. Where is the Council of Imams? Where is the Inter-Religious Council? Where are the Pentecostal fellowships and the Soways, the herbalists, the priests, and the chiefs? This fight cannot be won in police stations and courtrooms alone. It must be won in mosques, churches, shrines, and homes, where belief is born and reshaped. There must be a nationwide campaign. No human sacrifice in the name of tradition. No body parts in the name of prosperity. When spiritual leaders speak with one voice against these atrocities, the killers will no longer have cover. A national policy framework, turning pain into protection. A country haunted by ritual killings, spiritual manipulation, and criminal superstition needs a coordinated and enforceable National Ritual Crime Prevention and Response Strategy, NRCPRS. Here's what such a framework must include. 1. Legislative action and modernization. Enact clear laws that criminalize possession, trafficking, and use of human body parts for any purpose, including so-called spiritual or traditional uses. Introduce legislation to regulate and license traditional healers with mandatory codes of conduct and penalties for occult-linked crimes. Strengthen the Witchcraft Ordinance of 1920, not to criminalize belief, but to define and punish harmful practices backed by human rights violations. 2. Establishment of a National Ritual Crime Task Force, NRCTF. A multi-agency unit combining forensic experts, trained detectives, anthropologists, and social workers. Backed by international forensic support, especially from Interpol and donor-funded labs. Mandated to investigate, prosecute, and monitor ritual crime networks across all regions. 3. Shrine and Herbalist Registry. Require all traditional spiritual practitioners to register with a centralized government body under the Ministry of Social Welfare or Health. Conduct regular audits of shrines, healing centers, and herbalist compounds in partnership with chiefs and district councils. Revoke licenses or issue sanctions for anyone found linked to human rights abuses. 4. Victim and witness protection programs. Fund programs that protect whistleblowers, survivors, and witnesses who are often threatened or even killed in the course of ritual investigations. Provide legal aid, trauma counseling, and relocation support for families of victims like Papayo Kalokoh and the relatives of Fatmata Conte. Rethinking mental health, spirituality, and superstition. This crisis is not just legal or criminal, it is deeply psychosocial. It touches how people understand misfortune, how they seek power, and how desperation reshapes morality. To disrupt this belief system, Sierra Leone must invest in community-based mental health education, led by trained professionals who can help citizens distinguish mental illness from spiritual possession, grief from curses, and poverty from predestination. Public storytelling campaigns using radio dramas, film, music, and folk tales to reclaim culture from blood-stained superstition. Youth spiritual literacy programs, teaching school children about African spirituality, science, and human dignity, not as opposing forces, but as compatible parts of their identity. Because it is in the hearts of the youth that this battle must ultimately be won. Community leaders and the dual authority dilemma. Let's address a core contradiction at the heart of governance in Sierra Leone and in many parts of Africa. There are two systems of power operating side by side. 1. The formal state, ministries, police, parliament, judiciary. 2. The traditional and spiritual authorities, chiefs, herbalists, priests, soways, and secret societies. In many rural communities, it is the second group that commands more respect and fear. This parallel power structure has made it difficult to investigate or punish occult crimes, especially when sacred shrines and secret societies are involved. A forward-looking solution must include binding MOUs between the state and traditional councils, laying out clear roles and accountability for spiritual leaders. Training of paramount chiefs and local herbalists on human rights law, the dangers of ritual crime, and their responsibility to prevent it. Inclusion of women leaders and spiritual elders who have long challenged harmful rituals from within their communities. Only when both systems of authority collaborate, rather than clash or conceal, can we begin to dismantle the ritual crime network embedded in everyday life. Schools and churches, building the next generation of reformers. Let's not forget the transformative power of education and faith communities. Sierra Leone is a deeply religious nation, but also one hungry for opportunity. If we are to defeat the mindset that drives ritual killings, we must start with the institutions that shape minds. Primary and secondary schools must be empowered to teach children about human rights, respect for life, and the scientific basis of illness and wealth creation. Faith-based schools and churches must actively preach against rituals that exploit the poor in the name of spiritual growth. Community debates, youth forums, and interfaith dialogue groups must address the issue head-on, not as taboo, but as a topic of moral urgency. The fear of talking about it is what keeps it alive, but silence is no longer an option. The economics of blood, following the money trail. The shocking revelation from the BBC Africa Eye investigation that a so-called juju practitioner offered body parts for sale at 70 million leones, about 3,000, is not just horrifying. It is economically revealing. Consider this. Sierra Leone's minimum wage is a mere NLE 800 per month, approximately 30. Over half the population lives in multidimensional poverty. Youth unemployment and underemployment sit at over 70%. In such a context, promises of instant wealth, political power, or spiritual protection offered by powerful charms become seductive, especially when ritualists market body parts as rare commodities said to attract ancestral blessings or supernatural influence. And who are the buyers? Let's not pretend this is a practice limited to desperate rural dwellers. The clients are often elites, politicians seeking victory, businessmen hungry for contracts, pastors and imams chasing crowds and miracles, and sometimes members of secret societies seeking promotions or immunity. The ritual economy is vertical. It flows from the poor who are vulnerable to the rich who are desperate for more power. Rituals and racketeering. An organized network? Let's talk networks. BBC's investigation showed that one of the suspects, Idara, claimed to head a network of 250 herbalists. This isn't a handful of rogue actors, it's a coordinated system. And systems imply supply chains for acquiring victims and transporting remains, corrupt intermediaries, including mortuary attendants, corrupt police officers, and sometimes even medical professionals. International buyers or spiritual tourism, where foreign clients come to Sierra Leone for real power. Could we be looking at a ritual industry akin to human trafficking? There are growing signs that this isn't mere belief, it's business. And like all black markets, it thrives on chaos, weak enforcement, and silence. Interpol and transnational criminal experts must begin treating ritual killings as an organized crime problem, not just a cultural anomaly. Corruption, the killer's best friend. We must now confront a toxic truth. Corruption protects the ritual economy. Ask yourself, why are suspects granted bail so easily, even in murder cases? Why do files go missing in police stations? Why do trials never begin or mysteriously stall? Why are known shrine locations never properly searched or regulated? The answer, far too often, is money and fear. Some traditional healers enjoy political protection. Some shrines are used during election seasons, allegedly for ritual consultations by candidates. Some security officers are paid to look the other way, and in return, they gain protection from the gods or a piece of the prophet. This is not just a law enforcement failure. It is a governance failure, a breakdown in ethics from top to bottom. Cutting off the demand, economic alternatives, and social resilience. To end the supply of body parts, we must also end the demand, and that means addressing the root drivers of spiritual desperation. Unemployment, especially among youth. Insecurity, including political violence and instability. Weak social safety nets that leave people turning to charms instead of systems. Poor health care and mental health access, driving people to healers instead of doctors. Let's be clear, no society will eliminate ritual violence through policing alone. You need to build a culture of economic dignity, where people no longer seek magic to solve what public policy has failed to address. That means job creation programs, especially for at-risk youth in districts like Kambia, Port Loko, Bombali, and Koinadugu. Financial support for traditional herbalists willing to register, reform, and work legally. Reward schemes for whistleblowers who report occult crimes. Partnerships with tech companies to track and report online content promoting ritual practices. Because the juju economy is not only in shrines, it's also now online. The political cost of truth, why leaders rarely speak out. In a country plagued by ritual killings, one of the most deafening silences comes from the political class. Let us ask without fear, how many members of parliament have issued statements demanding justice for Papayo Kalokoh or Fatmata Conte? Where is the voice of the First Lady, who champions girls' rights, but has remained silent on this deadly crisis affecting young girls across the nation? Why hasn't the President of Sierra Leone or the Ministry of Internal Affairs launched a national commission or public inquiry into ritual-related killings? Could it be that some are spiritually entangled, financially compromised, or simply afraid to offend traditional power brokers ahead of election cycles? We must remember that ritual killings are not merely a criminal issue, they are deeply political. And in politics, silence is often a form of complicity. Yet in countries like Tanzania, Ghana, and Rwanda, presidents and lawmakers have taken bold steps. Tanzania's late president John Magufuli cracked down on ritual killings targeting people with albinism. Ghana's parliament debated a motion in 2021 to criminalize spiritual practices linked to abuse and murder. Rwanda's leadership invested heavily in de-radicalizing harmful traditional beliefs through education, law, and economic transformation. These are examples Sierra Leone and all African countries must study closely. A message to African citizens and leaders. So where do we go from here? Let me speak first to citizens across Africa, especially the youth, to the young men and women struggling to find work, respect, or recognition. Your future does not lie in blood rituals. You do not need a charm to succeed. You need skills, determination, and a society that believes in your potential. To the elders and traditional leaders, you are the guardians of our culture. But not every tradition is sacred. True tradition does not kill, it protects. Stand up and denounce those who misuse your names and symbols to commit horror. To my colleagues in the media, keep the lights on, investigate, expose. Do not let the story die when the headlines fade. To our teachers and religious leaders, preach dignity, preach science, preach the sacredness of life, not shortcuts to prosperity through death. And to our African leaders, both elected and aspiring, your power is not measured by how many people chant your name in rallies. Your greatness is not confirmed by what your shrine says after midnight. Your legacy will be judged by how many lives you protect, how many children you save, and how many systems you build, not how many charms you wear under your clothes. Now is the time to pass laws. Now is the time to fund investigations. Now is the time to confront the darkness, not with fear, but with facts and leadership. Key messages from this investigation. Let me leave you with the core truths uncovered over this series. 1. Ritual killings in Sierra Leone are real, widespread, and largely unpunished. Victims like Papayo Kalokoh and Fatmata Conte deserve justice, not silence. 2nd, a hidden economy of body parts exists, fueled by poverty, superstition, and political ambition. From backstreet herbalists to alleged elite patrons, the trade in human life is profitable and protected. 3rd, the state is failing through weak law enforcement, judicial inaction, and cultural denial. Sierra Leone has only one pathologist for 8.9 million people and almost no support systems for victims' families. 4th, traditional beliefs are being weaponized. Not all spirituality is harmful, but when it involves blood, mutilation, and human sacrifice, it becomes a threat to national security. 5th, The international community, the diaspora, civil society, and the media must act together. This is not just a local issue, it's a regional crisis with cross-border implications. Sixth, solutions must be multidimensional: legal, educational, economic, cultural, and political. From shrine regulation to school reform, from police training to poverty reduction, the battle must be fought on all fronts. Ritual killings are not culture. They are a crime against humanity. African governments must invest in justice, protect children, regulate traditional practices, and challenge beliefs that weaponize fear. Citizens must speak up, leaders must act, and together we must reject death masquerading as tradition. This is the bold African voice, shining a light where others stay silent. Like, share, and subscribe to join the movement for truth in Africa. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay bold, and stay informed.